Hey, everybody. I just want to do a little recap of what we talked about yesterday because the great thing about teaching is sometimes, even after years and years and years of doing this, as you're going along, you learn as you teach. And yesterday was one of those days as we were going over our foundations of government questions. Everything just started to come together for me, and I wanted to make sure we got it in a nice recap in a nice, quick, concise way so that you can go back and look at it. So, the question about security versus liberty, the foundations of government questions, like what's the purpose of government? What would you do if you were stranded on an island? It really all came together as we watched those videos, the starter videos yesterday on the 15th, the one about Hobbes and the one about Locke, because really to answer those questions, you have to kind of think about those two guys. Their philosophies are really without even knowing it, we know their philosophies, but let's put names to the philosophy. So we've got a lot of you who said when you land on the deserted island, it's going to be anarchy and crazy and people are going to fight with each other. Well, that's Hobbes. Hobbes believed that human nature is greedy, selfish, and brutal. And that if we lived in a state of nature, he called it, then our life would be brutish and short because all we would do is fight each other. It would be nice because we have all the liberty in the world to do whatever we want, but so does everybody else. And as soon as everybody else starts imposing their liberty on us, uh, then that's not so cool anymore. And so Hobbes says what humans do is in that situation, they will find someone, a sovereign. He called it a Leviathan, biblical reference. And they will give away all of their liberty in order to maintain security. And he says it doesn't matter how much liberty you give away as long as you're safe. And so people make a contract with each other to give up those liberties, give it to someone else. And in his case, and in his time, that was a monarch or a dictator. And so that one person, remember in the video, he had the staff, the Leviathan had the staff, and he had the ability to be gentle with that staff, a benevolent dictator, a nice dictator, or he could crush people with it and use that power violently. But in the end, the answer for Hobbes was always security. Security is more important than liberty. And then along comes Locke, and we get a totally different perspective. And I could see faces changing as we listen to Locke because Locke is so much more familiar to us in America. Locke talks about people being born with natural rights, and Locke called them life, liberty, and property. Now, those three things are really close to things that we know from the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson borrowed heavily in our founding document, the Declaration, which really lays out the principles of how America feels about government. But Jefferson changed it up a little bit. He said, everyone's born with unalienable rights, rights that can't be taken away, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But it's the same idea. It all comes from Locke. And if you keep reading in the Declaration, you're going to read more Locke. Because for Locke, liberty was everything. Liberty was way more important than security. And sometimes you give up your security in order to maintain or to gain your liberty, like we did in the American Revolution. That next part of the Declaration, after those natural rights are listed, Jefferson, borrowing heavily from Locke, says, when governments are here to protect our natural rights, and if they don't, we don't only have the right to overthrow that government. We have the responsibility to overthrow that government. When governments don't protect your rights, it's the job of the people to overthrow that government and make a new one that will protect the rights, to make a better government. And so that's why we declare independence against Great Britain. And that is the philosophy of American government. So really, we talked about how in that debate, what's more important, liberty or security, we fall somewhere in the middle. We don't want ultimate liberty like in Hobbes' scenario where everyone is just going crazy and doing whatever they want to whomever they want, whenever they want. But we also don't want Hobbes' ultimate security all rested in a Leviathan with ultimate power with his staff to crush people or be nice to people. We don't want to depend on just one person to secure those rights for us. It's our job to secure those rights for ourselves. And so we find that happy medium with John Locke and Locke's philosophy. So if you're looking down through the foundations of government question, what happens when people land on a deserted island and there's nobody around? Well, it depends on whether you're a Hobbesian or a Lockean and how you answer that question. Those guys are going to answer that question differently. What's the purpose of government? That's another Hobbes-Locke scenario. Hobbes is going to say the purpose of government is to provide security. Locke says it's to secure your liberty. So every one of those questions almost you can go down through there and think of how would Hobbes answer it, how would Locke answer it. And it really gets down to the bottom where we get into those weighty quotes from the Federalist Papers where Madison says, if men were angels, we wouldn't need government. Well, we're not angels. We're not perfect. We're not good at heart. And so in order to make sure we do have some security, we have to have rules. We have to have some sort of government to keep people in check, to balance our humanity, our badness and our goodness. The government's there, as Locke says in the video, is a third-party mediator, and he used a court as an example. That's what government does, according to Locke and according to American political philosophy. And then the next one was about, it was Hamilton from the very first Federalist paper, where Hamilton talks about it's up to us to determine if we want to have a government based on accident and force, or whether we want a government based on reflection and choice. And those are two stark differences. A government based on accident and force is like a monarchy. There's no merit to becoming king. You just have to be the firstborn son of the king. And when the king dies, you get to become king, whether you're qualified, whether you're ready, whether you're prepared. And so that's accident. You don't have any determination over whether you're born or not. And the force is in a monarchy or a dictatorship. That's how you enforce the rules, through brute force. And if the people don't listen to you, then you will exercise as much force as necessary to make them listen to you. The other option, reflection and choice, that's where we get to think about what candidates say, who we believe, who we support, and then we choose those people. We reflect on whether they do a good job, and then we have the option of whether we want to vote for them again or not. And if things get really terrible, like in the 1760s and 1770s, we can reflect on whether or not the government that we have is even good enough at all, and whether we should rebel and overthrow that government and make a new one. So it was really fun for me yesterday as we were talking, because there were a million things going through my head and all these connections were getting made. And they got made in little bits and pieces as the day went on. So some of you early in the morning may not have been the beneficiaries of the new connections that I made, the new learning that I made as I was teaching. So I wanted to make sure I got it all on video in a nice, concise spot. And maybe it'll help you with your foundations of government question. Maybe it'll help you form your argument. What's more important, liberty or security? And maybe it'll help you be a better citizen. So what we're going to do today, we've been talking about what makes good government good, what makes bad government bad. Today, we're going to start talking about our role as citizens in our government. What makes a good citizen good? What makes a bad citizen bad? And we're going to touch on something the founders like to call virtue. And Aristotle said virtue was that happy medium in the middle. Too much of a good thing can actually be a bad thing. And so we don't want ultimate good, ultimate bad. Aristotle says you got to find that middle, and he called it virtue. That ability to think of we and the good of we before the good of me. And so we're going to look at different virtues, civic virtues that the founders really valued, really thought a lot of, and thought every citizen should have. And we're going to try to be better citizens by looking at those virtues that those founders espoused in themselves and wanted other citizens to espouse in themselves. All right, so bad government, good government is what we've been talking about. Now we're going to move to our responsibilities, not just our rights, but our responsibilities as citizens in the government in which we live. Thanks.